go? Where do we
Counting
start?
down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Mr. Ray Parkin, welcome to the CamTalks show.
Nice to be here.
What a pleasure it is to be with you, sat in this very
Yeah.
lovely room of yours.
Hmm.
Thank you. For those people that don't know the famous Ray Parkin, anyone out there that doesn't know Ray Parkin, you better sort yourselves out. But please, Ray, give us a quick rundown of who you are and why it is we're sat in this lovely room of yours
Well,
today.
first of all, my fame doesn't spread all that far. I'm sitting in my front room. That's about it. So, what am I all about? Really, I just come from a show business family, from a particular side of it that branched out as it went along, mainly due to my father and because I had the same sort of connection with my father that you got with your father. We got on like a house on fire. And I was just fascinated by what he did. And I just joined in, and got on the wagon and had a fabulous time.
Wonderful. And so this is it. So kind of bring us back to the early days. And so where were you born? I mean, because with all due respect, Ray, it doesn't sound like you got much of an accent. Yeah,
I
everyone in
haven't.
Alderney seems to have
No,
just this proper
no,
accent. I don't know.
no. Alderney doesn't actually have an accent either. But in fact, I was born in North Devon, and I certainly don't have one of those
You
accents.
don't, do you?
No, I don't. But and a place called Ilfracombe, which I was always told was called Ilfracombe. Uh, but Ilfracombe, which was a lovely little North Devon town, and with beautiful scenery, lovely coastline. And I was born there because my father and mother were in the travelling business. They had come from show business travelling families.
As in
And
as in gypsy side of travelling, or more.
well, probably slightly on one side, certainly on my father's side, yeah, that came from a long line of
I can
gypsy.
see it now, Ray.
Yeah,
Yeah, a little bit of the entrepreneurial spirit.
yeah.
Yeah.
They had to just take life as they found it and adjust themselves, the gypsies. And a lot of gypsies, a lot of people are under the wrong, the wrong,
Get it in their head that gypsies are,
a particular type
rough,
of thing. Well,
fairground.
a lot of people connect them with travellers, and well, we were travellers. But now you look at travellers, and it's a different word altogether.
Yeah.
My family, I know that my great grandfather, Adolphus Gray, was a very good musician, and he played a fine fiddle, and he travelled the roads on his own. And he went to Luton one year, and he met a lovely girl who played the harp. And he thought, this is useful. I hope she can carry that thing. And they got married. They got married, and they had 8 children. And they travelled the roads together. And she sang and played the harp. They sang together, and they made a good living out of it.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Wow. And of course, dare I ask your age, Ray? I mean, this was
my
back
age.
in 19.
Oh, no, no, this wasn't 19. This was probably just a little bit before that.
Wow.
Yeah,
So we're talking,
we're talking about Victorian times.
bloody hell.
Yeah.
Wow. And so when did you come along then? When was Mr. Ray Parkin
Well,
born?
I was born. Well, my father, that there's a big gap there. My father was the grandson of Adolphus and Adolphus Gray. And they were always known, the Gray family were always known as a fairly wealthy travelling people. They'd always got a bit of dosh. And so my father, he was born into it, but never wanted to be part of it.
So let me ask you then, Ray. So obviously traveling around at such a young age, your father and your mother.
Yeah.
I mean, was there ever a place where they decided to call home, or was it just
I think my father always wanted to find somewhere to call home, but he was very particular about where his home was going to be. And so, although we travelled the West Country and sometimes up in the Midlands, um, he always had his sights on London. thought the big city, that's where it's all happening. But so we started off and we travelled, and I remember that very well, and I loved it. But he wanted a more permanent thing. He felt that travelling was going to get him or us nowhere.
Mm.
And so, and he was absolutely right. Travelling Family is part of the Showman Guild, which I was once a member, and he was certainly, was an ancient guild, and it has its traditions. And you'll find that once a fair is established, the person who has that fair will always be the boss of it. He will always have the same tenants. He will always, and it'll run through the family over the years. And that's what he didn't like about it.
Mm-hmm.
You could go back, go 50 years on, and you'll see the same family doing the same thing with the same sort of equipment. And all they were doing was getting older, you know? They weren't getting anywhere. They were just getting older.
Interesting.
He
But
didn't want that.
we're talking fun fairs, right? So and
Yeah.
is this kind of circus style?
No, it was fun fairs. Fun fairs and circus really are
Two things.
distinct, yes.
Interesting.
But my father, he always had his eye on the circus, and when he was in his early 20s, the war had just broken out, 1939, end of 39, and we moved up with all our fairground equipment, and my father had rented a Victorian prison from the Chichester Council, and he put all of his fairground equipment in there, and it was very safe. You know, prisons are safe, aren't they? And it had cells and everything where we could put things, and all the kids could play around. And then he went up to London, and he walked into the LCC in London, the London County Council headquarters, and he met whoever he had to meet, including the Lord Mayor of London at one stage.
Blimey.
We're now in early 1940, and he said, "Mr. Mayor, gentlemen," there were no ladies on the council in those days, all wrong. And he said, "I look at London now," he said, "it is a city without entertainment. Everything is closed down. You have thousands of refugees, you have thousands of troops coming in from all over the world to support the battle ahead, and there's no entertainment. I would like to put on an all-British circus at any venue that you can give me."
Wow.
And they said, "What about Earl's Court Arena?" "That'll do," he said. They were under the misapprehension that he actually run circus before. He'd never ever had anything to do with it. But he always worked on the principle that there was always somebody out there that knew how to do it better than he did. And he learned from them. That's what he did throughout his life, actually. He learned from others.
Wow.
Just as I have done in many ways. I've learnt from others when I was in the hotel business. You know, you look at people who have far more knowledge than yourself.
Sure, but I mean, how hard was that back in those days to
Back in
find
those
someone?
days, well, actually, it was much easier than it would have been today. You'd have gone through several hundred committees, and you know, but they just gave a yes to it, and they gave him the Earl's Court Arena. They trusted him, and he did the job for them. That show, he got all British entertainers who were also very pleased to be working.
Mm.
And he got them all to London. He rehearsed them. He put a big fairground, including his own fairground, around the circus in the Empress Hall. Just like the Bertram Mills Circus, which wasn't running at that time, because it was so big that they felt that it was too much of a target. And so, for bombing and so on. And so he put the show on, and they said, "This is going to be a trial." Well, that trial lasted 2 months,
Wow.
which is all the time you needed to run a circus successfully, you know.
Interesting.
Absolutely brilliant. And he entertained thousands of troops who got in free of charge. Others had to pay.
And so, what was it like, within the fairground? What kind of games and activities were they playing? I can't imagine it's like today with these big machines and the big
Well, it
fluffy
was
teddy
big, some
bears.
big machines, but some of the big machines were there,
Yeah.
But a lot of the old machines, like the Eli wheel, the big wheel and things like they've been around for 100 years.
Wow.
And so in slightly different form. But so really, all that stuff was available, and whatever you could fit into the room, dodgems and speedway tracks and Noah's Arks and everything, sideshows, and all the animals, of course, that come with the circus were not with us because once again, the like London Zoo at that time, they closed it because they felt that the animals, if the zoo was bombed, would have been of terrible danger to Londoners, if they were free. So there were very few animals in it except horses, really. But it was a
Interesting.
great show, and the great
Mm.
stars of the day went to see it, and he got wonderful reviews. And I've got books and books of everything he did. My father got companies to do cuttings for him. There were companies around. They're probably still around, actually, that look at something that you're doing, and they do any press that is any newspaper anywhere, or anything that's on radio or on television. They will make sure that that is picked up and put into some sort of memory form um, to show how the show went.
Amazing. So, and this is kind of like some of the earliest forms of marketing, then, in order to
Yes,
show people what has gone on. Did
that's
that
right.
help your father then move on
It
to bigger
helped him.
things?
And all the little incidents that happened. There were always incidents in circus. People fall off of trapezes, they're bitten by lions and tigers, and so on.
But because people love that kind of stuff, though, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
It's that
Bit of
that's
blood and
yeah,
gore.
spontaneity, a little bit of violence. And so, tell
Yes.
me, what was it? I guess in my head, I think travelers,
Yeah.
circus, fun fairs back
Mm.
in the day. Was it a little? Could it be a little bit rough on times, or
Yeah.
was it very? What was the atmosphere like?
Well, I think, bear in mind, the only thing that made anything in Empress Hall, certainly the circus itself, was beautifully run and very well organized. You never had any problems of anything, any kind. You had, there were thousands of troops involved. So sometimes you get one or two a bit drunk, but usually they were looked after by their mates. Oh, come on, cut it out, Jack. We're in free, mate. And so you didn't really get any trouble at all.
Wow. And so when you came along, how easy was it for you to adapt to all this
Uh,
environment?
well, life was always one great big surprise for me, and I was waiting for the next one. And that's why I more or less attached myself to my father when I was a kid. And because I was always so excited about what there was in the future. And wow, he didn't let me down. There were so many things.
And what's the biggest lesson that your father taught you when you were younger?
If you can't do it yourself, don't do it. And if you don't know how to do something, never get involved in it unless you've got somebody good to show you how to do it. And that's what he did. He didn't know anything about circus. He didn't know a horse from well, he did about horses, but um, he just didn't know anything about it. But he got people who worked for him as managers who stayed with him. His staff always stayed with him 20, 30 years. And later on, even from those circus days, he had two people working with him 30 years later,
Wow.
and then passed on to their son. It sort of stayed as a family thing almost. Quite
So
amazing.
how many people did you have in your family kind of growing up? Who were the
As we
key
grew up,
members?
well, we were just a family of, I was the second son, my brother, my older brother. Then I had a little sister born in 1946, 48. And then a little boy born in 1939, my brother Gary. They never got that involvement that I did because I started off, attached to him sort of thing, and I was his little boy. I found that if I just hung around, something was always in the air. For instance, a circus was a surprise because he would just come in and say, family, look, we're going into circus. We're starting next month. It'll be at wherever. We're moving up to so-and-so. Our new address will be, everything was organised. Absolutely amazing. We'd all go, yippee, you know. So that was a sort of surprising atmosphere that I lived in.
But this was during the Second World War.
It was.
So I mean, when most people are batten down the hatches and they're people are in scarce times, rationing and stuff. How were you able to kind of bring? Because you're supposed to be the fun,
Yeah.
right? And obviously a lot of people have suffered. And did you suffer much during the war, or were you kind of still
I
caught up in the
was,
funfair?
well, when London really got hot, the phony war finished, bombing started in London, circus closed, and it closed very quickly. In late January, I think that's when the bombing started. And we sort of got out of town fast. All of our equipment was stored, our fairground equipment, and everything was dispersed. We had to then make plans as to what we were going to do with ourselves. My father's first thoughts were to go back to where I was born, take all his equipment back there across the country roads, and there were country roads too. They're about as wide as this room, maybe, not even that. But and get it all in one place, and then see what he could do from there. See what happened. Well, we got back to Ilfracombe. He went straight to the council and said, "I'm back in town. I'm a local boy, more or less. I would like to park all my fairground equipment. Where can I put it?" They said, "Put it on the pier. You can store it there." Because all sort of the holiday side of things wasn't working. So he put his stuff on the pier and then said, "Could I please open some of the rides?" And they said, "I can't see why not." And so he did. He built it up on the pier, and he had a little fair which was permanent in Ilfracombe for ages.
Wow.
On the pier. And while that was happening, he noticed that two of the theatres in town, the only two theatres there were, because Ilfracombe was a Victorian holiday town, and there was all that sort of amenity was there, bandstands and theatres and all sorts. So he took the only two theatres, and he got a friend of his, an old friend, who was the uncle of Peter Sellers, the famous film actor, and he said, "Would you like," who had just finished work at the Garrick Theatre, I think it was, in London, where he was manager, retired as being too old. And "Would you like a job as a manager of my theatres in Devon?" He said, "I'd love to." He was a good old Jewish boy, and he was wonderful. He used to have the black coat and the Astrakhan collar, the derby hat, he looked, and the cigar.
Looked the part.
Absolutely looked the part. He was a delightful man.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
now you've set up on this pier and people are starting to come?
Oh, he just opened on Saturday, or whatever he could, and he didn't do it himself. Once again, he got family members who he trusted, and who were able to run the little fair. He got them to do it. He was nothing to do with it. He was out foraging for something else. So he thought, "I'll get the theatres going." So Alf Humphreys, who was our manager, he was from a theatrical family, and so he said, "Leave it to me." And they got stock theatre, which was like you get troupes who could do a series of plays over a month. And you would employ them, and they would put all the different plays on over the month and then move on to another theatre. A very fine way of entertaining. And so he did just that. He got a theatrical group in and did some stocks who were doing stock theatre. And I had the pleasure of operating one of the floodlights there when I was allowed to, because I was only about 9 years old. So it was somebody else. One of the big arc lamps, that they used to use, because they would put variety shows on on the Saturday or something like that. Ilfracombe at that time was full of entertainers because entertainment was dead in London. So it was people in uniform, a lot of them, but they were famous entertainers, and he would use them. They weren't doing much, It was nothing happening. So anyway, he got the theatres going, and that was fine. And then, quite amazingly, his manager called him in London and said, Stan, I've got some important news for you. He said, 40,000 American troops have just arrived outside the town. They were there for the D-Day preparation. And their entertainment officer has just been to see me, and he wants everything we've got. Wow. He said they will just take every seat, doesn't matter how much we charge, they'll just take every seat for every performance in advance.
That's his dream come true, right?
So that's it. Dear old Alf, he said, I've never had it like this before, you know. It was always hard work for him. So my father said, well, get on with it. And then they put on some fabulous shows, the Americans did, you know, including Glenn Miller was down there with his, you know, it was quite amazing, really, who was there. There were a lot of families, too, that were evacuated from London, because by that time I'd been evacuated from London because London was being hit badly. Mm. And we did have an apartment in London, just on the top of Edgware Road near Marble Arch. And so really, now where are we? Yeah, we're now at a stage where he's running the theatres. And in those days, there were people of title who used to own vast parts of different counties. They still do in their own funny way, but it's all very different now. And there was one lady down there, Lady Chichester, the last of the line of the Chichesters, who had been more or less the titled lady of that part of Devon. Their family had been there since Henry III. Wow. So they'd been there a long time. And she loved the theatre. So when my father noticed that she was always reserving seats for herself, you know, one of her staff. And then once he went down, found she wasn't there. And so he asked his manager, why is it that Lady Chichester isn't here? And he said, I don't really know, but she just stopped coming. So my father drove out to see her at where she was a beautiful estate. And she said, well, it's as simple as this. My chauffeur has been called up, and I don't have anybody to drive me. There were no taxis or anything like that around there.
No Ubers.
No, unless you went in a horse and carriage, you know. And so she said, that problem has just been solved. You will be picked up anytime you want to go. And he arranged to pick her up, often picking her up himself. They became great friends. In our spare time, we used to love going onto the beach at Woolacombe, close by, which is one of the finest beaches in the world. It is so beautiful in itself. And we used to love going on the beach there and surfing as kids, and my father was there. It'd be a lovely family occasions. When it came to my father, when it came to Mrs. Lady Chichester getting a bit older, she got to the end of the line and she said, I'm going to get rid of all my estates. I'm giving most of it to the National Trust. I know you love the beach, and I know you love, you know, that area. I would like you to have it.
Whoa.
My father said, well, I would love to have it for anything, you know, that I can afford. She said, well, look, I've got to do one thing. I've got to give this, offer it first to the local town council or the village council. Well, there was a smart-ass guy on the council, because she asked £10,000 for everything, and it was miles and miles of land.
But £10,000 is a huge amount of money.
It was, but still, it was still a lot of countryside, including one of the nicest beaches, you know, in Devon. And so the guys on the council got together and said, come on, we'll knock her down to see if we can get it for £5. She was not the type to do that. And she doesn't even reply to the letter that they sent offering her 5,000 quid. She just contacted my dad and said, it's yours.
Wow.
And so he had got £10,000, only just, I think he scraped it together. And that's how we acquired the beach, in North Devon, that beautiful beach that we still run.
It's wonderful as well. I've been there, and when you see it today, it's so different to what I'm sure it was back then. What was the first thing your father and your family kind of had to do to the beach area in order to kind of make it what it is?
Well, during the war, it was the practice ground for the American invasion, or the Allied invasion of on D-Day. And so there were 20,000 troops training on the beach, back at the beach, bombs, all sorts. I was going to school actually just outside the village. You could hear what was going on. It was mayhem, and training young guys who I always used to look at them and think they all looked like people out of films, because the American troops all looked well turned out. And but they were just young guys. The local boys got a bit upset because these guys all looked like film stars, and the local girls, couldn't believe their luck. 20,000 to choose from. But that went on for about until D-Day, and then overnight, the whole lot disappeared.
Wow. And then you were kind of left with the
beach. So everything was cleared from it, and it got back to its normal. They were very appreciative. The Americans were very appreciative of the facilities and the fact that they could use everything. They could just take it over. They took over the big hotels in town, and they put their staff and their soldiers in. They just did what they liked, but they did a lot of payback. I was at school just close by, and suddenly, from having almost bare essential food, we suddenly got food we've never seen before. I didn't know what peanut butter was, and or steak occasionally. It was all brought in from the United States, and
Wow.
and we were getting food that no one else was getting.
So how do you think the impact that the Americans had once they left? I mean, was there because there seems to be something in the American culture
Yeah,
that you kind of have in these fairgrounds and the places where you have on the coast of England.
yeah. In the American culture, well, one of the things when I went down to Woolacombe and I took over as a director in 1984 or 5, um, and I went down there periodically, every month, to check on the business. I was in charge. My father had more or less retired. And what I really found out was that where were we? Sorry, darling.
Oh no, so the American influence on
The influence.
Woolacombe
Okay.
is very apparent.
Well, you say that. There were 20,000 troops down there training, and a lot of the hinterland there was covered in tents, vast lorries that could only just get down the road, black guys. Nobody had seen a black guy before in their lives, but they used to drive everything. They were great too, fabulous guys.
Wow.
And but it was all there, and then suddenly it went, and they were prepared to go, and they went, and they got out so fast. It was amazing. They were very well organized. When I took it over, I looked around and I thought, I remember this as a kid. I remember the landing craft landing on the beach, big transports with troops coming down the side of the ships, climbing into these little boats in bad weather, and coming onto the shore.
Wow.
It was amazing. It was like a wonderful big movie, and we could watch it from afar. They didn't block it off. They just allowed people to go on living.
And so I must imagine that you had a lot of friends, at the time, obviously being the son of this amazing entertainer. I mean, who were your friends at the time?
Really, I don't think we made much of that at all, really. I was just, I mean, you didn't know who, that didn't come into it, funnily enough. I was just another guy, in the school.
Obviously, and
school.
you've got your brothers and sisters, I mean.
They were not there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because I was the second child, and my brother Stanley Jr., had been evacuated to St Austell in Cornwall. So he didn't see all this at all, because he was slightly older. But the amazing thing was this: there was nothing. There was not a sign when I took over in the 80s So I set about doing something about it. I love history, modern history particularly. So did a lot of reading, a lot of local reading, a lot of research. I got to the Pentagon. I went to all sorts of people in the States, Arlington, and I found the original commanding officer who was still alive. And he was in his late 80s then, with a lovely little French wife he'd picked up during, he managed to find during the war, who was absolutely charming. And and I said, can you find any of your brother officers or anybody of your men? He said, I'll try, because I want to invite you over to England for a ceremony to say thank you for what you did then and the way you treated us. He couldn't wait. And we set up the local authorities and the local military base, the marine base close by. The British Air Base was there. They all wanted to be part of it, and they were. I got a historical group had American military vehicles, loads of them, and they came from all over the place with their vehicles, even 2 tanks,
Whoa.
and on transporters. And they brought it all to Woolacombe that day, and we had 100 American soldiers, but of course they were local boys, but dressed perfectly in the clothes of the day.
Wow.
For a ceremony. We did a beautiful stone, which is very much part of the local sort of. It's in a very important place on the beach where those poor chaps had to train for D-Day, and it gave me the most enormous pleasure, and them too, to be invited there for the first place. And I will always remember the commanding officer, and he just said to me, I'm staying in that hotel, he said, where I stayed during the war with my troops. And he said, one thing I was looking forward to very much was hearing the beat of the waves as they came in at Woolacombe, that big surf. He said, I woke my wife up in the middle of the night and said, it's there. I can hear it, you know. It was very touching, and I've got lots of documentation, you know, of the ceremony that day.
I love it. So
Yeah.
tell me, Ray, what's Woolacombe like now compared to
Now,
then?
well, it's progressed. We did a few years with the blue flag, so I was the first in Devon to get a blue flag. Um, then we found that there was too much. There was far too. Usually, blue flag applies to local beaches run by the local authority. My beach was run by us, and we found they were asking us things to do that really were not our job, like train children and so on. You know, we didn't want to do that, and it was ideal if they would be known a local authority, but we didn't want to get involved in all that. We were a business, um, so really we cleared the beach completely of any rubbish had been there. We made everything got back to its natural form, because I'm a great lover of nature and it's such a beautiful place. Um, we resurrected all the buildings and rebuilt lavatories, blocks, and God knows what, because we actually provide the lavatories for the village.
Wow, it's a lot of toilet roll.
A lot of toilet rolls. I'll give you an idea of how much. I think last year, the toilet rolls and the disinfectant or whatever before wages came to £17,000
Yeah,
for lavatory paper. That's a lot of lavatory
it's a
paper,
lot of shit.
a lot of bums.
Wow.
And but we're now up to, you know, our car parks that the local people in the early days, the council were against us having that, turning the old putting greens and God knows what that were out of date into car parks. But of course, they were feeding the shops in the area, because parking is very tricky in North Devon. Woolacombe's got more parking than anywhere in that part of the world, easily.
And is it strange because obviously so car parks is you know one of the many things that you're known
Yeah,
for, but
yeah.
your name is Ray Parkin.
Yeah.
So is there an association there? Because I believe this is called nominative determinism, which is where you become something in your name. So I'm Cam, and I'm a cameraman, and all this
Mm.
kind of stuff. So, I mean, parking, was that ever a thing that you thought this is going to be a really good money maker and this is going to be a way of bringing the people to Woolacombe? Because without the parking,
Yeah.
there's no way that people would travel for hundreds of miles to get there.
No, that's true. In fact, when I got down there, I found that there was a slightly hostile approach. One of the reasons was it was locally known that the beach was privately owned, you know. That takes some digesting too for a lot of people, privately owned beaches. But that didn't, certainly in our case, make them worse. It made it better. But they couldn't accept that. They found that was difficult to accept. And particularly the fact that I lived in the Channel Islands. The Channel Islands had this name for being sort of money laundering and all sorts of things, and they thought, oh, the money's all going out, which doesn't at all. We just employ local people. Everything we earn there stays there. So it's taxed in UK, and so really we've been a real benefit, and they have now accepted the fact that that's the case.
Of course they have.
Yeah.
And this is it. So obviously, talking about the Channel Islands, I mean, anyone that doesn't understand where Alderney is needs to go find it on a map. But
Yeah.
when was the first time you had heard of Alderney? And dare I ask when the first time you came to Alderney was?
Yeah. Well, my dad, one of his schemes, he was in Barnet running two factories. They were formerly owned by a firm called Max Factor, the cosmetic
Of
company.
course, yeah, very
Yeah,
famous,
okay.
huge.
But these factories were very small, and they made just little things like compacts, um, lipstick holders, all sorts of tiny things like that. But they had something like 60 people working in the factory that my father got, and they closed the factory because anything that was regarded as a luxury during the war was immediately banned. You couldn't get ice cream, you couldn't get anything that was regarded as a luxury. So when he took over, some of the guys working there were in the forces, but there was a workforce standing by of older men that were just doing nothing. So my father learned how to be an engineer. He learned how to use a lathe. He learned, and he worked with them, and he became a very proficient guy on machinery. Um, and they started making stuff, and he didn't quite know what to make. So he thought the people that will be wanting something are the armed services. So he went to the Minister of Defence. The Minister of Defence said, yes, contact the local he contacted a British RAF base close by, quite a big one, Uxbridge, and he became very friendly with them there, and he started to get orders in from all of the big bases and so on, and for the RAF as a whole, for things like long range tanks with the fittings on, and all that sort of. They could make the lot there.
Wow,
So that's what he made.
interesting.
So for long range tanks, for long range flying, that could be jettisoned and so on. Anyway, he was in a shop. He was in a pub one day at lunchtime. He didn't drink, my father, until later in life, but he didn't drink at that time. He used to go in at the pub, have a cup of tea and a sandwich. And there was a man sitting opposite him. He said, "Do you mind if I sit with you?" And he said, "No, that's all right," the guy said. So they sat, and my father said, "Where do you come from?" He said, "I come from the Channel Islands." I said, "The Channel Islands? I'm not, what about the Channel? Where are they, And so he explained, and my father suddenly realised where they were, and he said, "What did you do?" He said, "I had a holiday camp in Jersey." Wow. Now, my father had a good friend who he was brought up with called Billy Butler, and they were mates together, and he overtook my father by by really going into the holiday camp business big time. He was an enormous name. And my father wanted to develop along the same lines as him. But anyway, he said to this guy, "Are you going back there when the war's over?" And so the guy said, "No, I'm Jewish. I don't want to know about it. We were thrown out. We were told to leave." He said, quite rightly. But before the Germans, and he said, everything was just left. He said, "Do you still own it?" And he said, "Yes." "Would you like to sell it to me?" So the guy said, "Yes, I would." He said, "Well, there's only one problem." They agreed on a price. He said, "There's only one problem. The Germans are still there. How do I know it exists?" So he said, "Well," the guy said, "Well," he said, "I don't even have any photographs. I don't have any ownership details." He said, "But it's all registered in the local graph there." And he said also, which is like the government offices, in Jersey, he said, "What about photographs?" Well, my father had a very strong connection to the RAF. And he went to Uxbridge and said, "You don't happen to have any photographs of the northwest corner of Jersey, do you?" And the guy said, "Well," he said, "I don't know." He said, "We'll have a look. But if we haven't, we can get some because they've stopped firing at us. They know that things are not going their way." This is towards the end of the war. And the best thing, he said, "Do you think you can get some photographs for me?" And so a month later, my father got a message to say, "Your photographs have arrived."
Some sneaky aerial shots from the
And
RAF.
said, yeah, it was, yeah.
Fantastic.
So,
And so that was very much in line with what he was already doing with fun fairs and putting on entertainment.
we'd never been in the hospitality business, with accommodation before. But once again, he just got good people around him who knew what they were doing.
So after the war, I'm imagining he's going to Jersey now.
Straight to Jersey, and his family went with him. And we arrived there just after the occupation ended. And in fact, when we went to have a look at the camp, there were 200 German soldiers there, all sort of sitting around wondering what to do. And they'd been told that they would be repatriated eventually. Well, my father had employed all manner of people because he'd got a lot of work with building professionals to see what was needed. And the British government at that time was very favourable to the Channel Islands. They knew that the Channel Islands had a bad time. And so they said, "Anything you need, we'll take off this sort of not available thing." Because a lot of things were restricted, like metal, even concrete, all sorts of things, But for Jersey, no problem. So he loaded up a ship with a couple of quantity surveyors and staff to go and build the holiday camp. And we all turned up in Jersey. I went over by the mailboat, which I thought was exciting at a 15-year-old. And there it was. Then my father said to our manager, our new manager, "Can you see if these German guys would like some work?" So he went to see the German commandant of the 200 guys, and he said, "We would love to work." He said, "Will we get paid?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So they built an Olympic-sized swimming pool for us. They built, which was there until a little while ago, but when it was complete, the camp was completely destroyed a little while ago, taken out of existence and turned back to countryside, which is good. Holiday camp days, as far as I'm concerned, are over.
Yeah, it's all about cheap flights to Spain now, right?
That's it.
Wow.
So anyway, he got the camp going, and we moved to Jersey, and I became a Jerseyman, set up life, and then a few years later, after 10, 15 years of the camp, me working at the camp as well, he had become very good friends with Billy Buckland and the other great entrepreneur, Fred Pontin.
Wow.
Yeah, and
two massive names in entertainment.
Yeah, and they were great mates. And so Fred Pontin bought the camp and turned it into Continental or whatever it was, And my father said to me, well, what are you going to do with yourself? Well, I was like a fish out of water. I'd only ever known the holiday camp business and the fairground business and so on. So I said, well, I have no idea. He said, look, there is a hotel for sale in Alderney. He said, it's a lot of money. He said, but, he said it's 30,000 quid, but it's a bit of a mess. So I understand. But let's go and have a look. So we flew over. By that time, my father was flying privately. He loved flying. And so we flew over to Alderney. We got out, had a look, and we went to the hotel. We came in. The guy who owned it was there. The tables were all set up. It was a weird-looking place. But when you went inside, it had a lovely atmosphere. And he'd set it up almost as if it was ready to open that night, but it wasn't. My father did all the right things. He said, let's have a look at the basics. What about the electricity? Well, we turned a light on in the reception, and you could actually hear the electricity going around the room. It was going from one side to the other, and eventually the light lit, It's sort of squeaking, as it went round. Well, that was the same all over the hotel. The plumbing was unbelievable. The boiler room looked like it was out of the Titanic, and needed a couple of stokers, And so really, my dad said, look, do you like it, Ray? I said, I think it's an unbelievable place, but it needs a lot of work. And he said, well, make him an offer for it. And I said, like what? He wants £30,000.
Bloody hell. Which was huge, right?
Huge.
Huge amounts of
So
money.
I said, well, I was only 25. So, I was a kid. And he said, make him an offer. I said, like what? And he said, offer him £8,000. I said, I can't do it, Dad. I can't do it. I'm a coward. I can't do it. The guy's asked 30,000 and you're telling him, he said, well, what is he going to do? He's going to only see to get out of it, bugger off. So I walked up to him and the guy said to me, what do you think? A lot of potential, isn't it? He was still trying to sell it to me. And I said, I'm sorry, but we've had a look around and it really needs a lot of work. The very best we can do, the very best I can do is 8,000. He said, yeah, that's fine. And he said, there's a car outside as well. You can have that. There's the key.
Bloody hell, there you go.
So 8,000 quid.
Wow.
So we did need another £40,000 to get it going again, which we opened the following year in 1961. And I have lived very, very happily in Alderney ever since.
And of course, so this is known as the Grand Hotel.
Yes.
Was it called the Grand Hotel?
Well, it ended up calling the Grand Island Hotel. It softened down the Grand a bit, because people expect Grand Hotels to be of a particular type, don't they?
Quite grand, right?
Yeah, yes. But the Grand Hotel was full of character and characters. Your father will will agree with me about that because he was one of my early guests.
Wow.
And he loved it as I loved it, absolutely amazing.
So what's the difference running, so now that you've had all this experience in fun fairs, in entertainment, and now hospitality with the camp on Jersey, what was the big challenges of taking over the Grand?
The big challenges taking over the Grand was that I didn't know what I was doing. I had a basic...
Never stopped you before though, right?
No, but the basic problem was the expertise involved in the standard that I was looking for. Holiday camps was a basic standard that everybody should know in catering. How to set things up, how to make sure that everything you want is in place. It's no use going into a restaurant and they're giving you lamb and you haven't got any mint sauce and you haven't got any, you've got to have everything in place for the customers you've got. But the style I wanted was much higher standard. And so I employed the maitre d' from the Mount Nelson Hotel in Cape Town. I was very lucky to get him. And he came to Alderney and he stayed here for the rest of his life.
Wow.
He loved it too. Isn't it lovely?
So obviously, what was the Grand known for? You know, in its heyday, what was the one
What it was
thing?
known for was going in and you could get, for instance, the food was always excellent. Um, I had the first head chef I had was a fabulous chef called Kurt Nadler. He's still living in Alderney. Another one hooked.
It's a theme, isn't it, of yours, Ray?
Yeah, and he was very highly trained, really very highly trained, and it was he knew that was the standard I wanted, and he gave me that exactly what I wanted. With him and the guy out front, Dries Helmut, his name was.
Hmm.
Uh, he knew the standard I want in the dining room. We had lamps. We did that sort of cooking, lamp cooking in the dining room, which people loved in those days. You could. They would come to you with a trolley, with a lamp. I'll show you one later. Actually, I've still got
Yeah, I'd
mine,
love to see it.
and they would cook for you at the table.
Wow.
And it was selective things like steaks, beautiful steaks, and with beautiful sauces, lovely desserts. You know, lovely flambe desserts, all finished off with a flame at the table, you know.
Wow, this is incredibly
Yeah,
fancy for Old Ray.
very fancy, and
Yeah.
people loved it.
Yeah.
But the rest of the time, it was just wholesome, very good cooking, you know.
And this must have brought a lot of people to the island who had never heard of
I
Oldney
think
before.
so.
How many or no, what kind of guests were you bringing here at the time?
The sort of guests that I thought were marvellous. They were just the sort that I wanted to bring over. Because Alderney is a very, you know, even in those days, but it's as it is now, it's a very special place, and there's no particular facilities, fun fairs, nothing like that to entertainment. Wonderful beaches, fabulous family holidays. More important, actually, at the time is where were they going to come from? The only links we had at that time was uh, British Airways or BEA at that time for a very short period, and they were flying Rapides as they had done before the war, twin wing aeroplanes, you know, 8 seaters. But Jersey Airlines took over and they started flying Herons. Herons had 4 engines and they were mini airliners, 16, I think, passengers. Um, and they were very popular. And they flew out of Gatwick,
Wow, Gatwick to Alderney.
Gatwick, Alderney.
Bloody hell.
And we had Gatwick, Alderney, Southampton, Alderney, Guernsey, Alderney, Jersey, Alderney.
Wow, that's more access than we have
Exactly
today.
what we should have now.
Incredible. Wow. Dare I ask when Aurigny came on the scene then?
When Aurigny came on the scene, they were very, very welcome because when Jersey Airlines packed up, I was on the States by that time, and I was on the tourism committee as well. I was chair of that. And we suddenly found that the airline running the you know, running the flight, the service at that time, just rang us one day and said, "We've decided we're going to pull out of Alderney. We really need different types of aircraft for Alderney. We don't have them. We're going to finish." And they finished the end of that month. And Alderney was without an airline for about 4 months. A marvellous character. There were two characters I adored at that time. One was Drew McQueen, the other was Fred Morton. Drew particularly said we must do something about it. They were getting no help from Guernsey. Guernsey said it's up to you. You sort yourselves out. Um, so Fred Morton had seen an advert of a new aeroplane built in the Isle of Wight called the Islander. So he rang them and said, "Who have you sold any to?" And he said, "We have sold some to a guy up in the Midlands called, I'm just trying to remember, my memory's going a bit, but he stayed with the airline almost till his death.
Wow.
And he came over here and built a service which was offering something like 8 flights to Southampton, 8 flights to Jersey, 8 flights to Guernsey
Per day.
a day.
A day.
And they were flying, and they were full. And you didn't have to book. You could book, but you didn't have to. You went up to the airport, but you could book ahead if you wanted to. Though that changed the whole nature of business in the Channel Islands. It changed the whole nature of sport because teams were flying back and forth. Alderney was getting cricket teams. We were turning them away, with a number that wanted to come, and it was cheap. And it really was the most innovative airline. Unfortunately, now it's exactly the opposite to that. It's gone completely the other way. It's ultra conservative, with no respect for money, by the look of it, and has let Alderney down very badly.
And
which is such a shame because that little airline was an absolute international treasure.
And the name itself, Ray, means Alderney.
It does.
And I think that's that. When I remember seeing an advertisement for Aurigny recently, it said Aurigny Guernsey's airline, and I just thought, how crazy is it that you've completely forgotten your roots?
It hurt as much, I think, to people who knew the origins of Aurigny when Guernsey tourism fed the information to the news people and to the television that the airline was born in Guernsey. That was like a dagger in the heart. It was born out of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of work by a few people who really loved Alderney.
It's definitely a community airline. So, I mean, talking a little bit about community in Alderney, because I think this is the special thing here. When was it that you got involved in Alderney Week? Alderney Week, for those that don't know, is one of the largest family-free events
in the Channel.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
so, what was your first experience of Alderney Week?
The first experience was I was on tourism. Somebody came to me and said, "I'm the boss of Alderney Week." A guy called Peter Moss, and he said, "I'm giving up." I didn't really know much about it. I had been 1 or 2 years here and just entered a float every year, got the hotel guests in, But it obviously got to a stage where am I?
So Alderney Week started.
Alderney Week.
I mean, Alderney Week's been over 100 years old, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't until what year was it that you got involved?
I took over in 69, 70.
69, 70, wow. Yeah. And at that time, what was because obviously, so Dad's ran Alderney Week, but before that, you kind of pathed the way for him to go and
well, what it was with me, I found the whole thing a piece of cake. I'd been entertainment manager at a holiday camp, and I looked at what was on, and it was there were a few very good events. There was the torchlight procession, which was great. I liked the idea of the Buttes Monday, the cavalcade. But other than that, there was nothing really. It was just a dog show on the Buttes and nothing. So I thought, well, I'll do what I did at the holiday camp. The guy who, as I say, said he was running it, said he couldn't run it any longer. I didn't ask him why, but he said, I've had enough. So I got the committee, the Alderney Week committee together, and I immediately saw what the problem was. Alderney Week was being run by a committee of which there were so many people on the committee that there wasn't anywhere in Alderney that there was big enough to take them. Everybody was on that committee. Every denomination, church, it was the Catholics, the Salvation Army, everybody was there. And everybody wanted their say.
Wow.
We didn't get, the first meeting we didn't get past item 2, And I thought, no, this is ridiculous. And so I just announced that because it was a part of my former expertise, I was going to take Alderney Week over myself. On the condition that I ran it with one secretary and a treasurer. The treasurer would be the state's treasurer, and that's how we ran it.
Wow.
State's treasurer did all the money. I did the organisation, and I got a whiz-bang secretary.
Amazing.
Absolutely terrific.
So a complete reorg, everything down to a small team.
It was then everybody was given instructions on what was wanted. There was a formula, uh, just as I'd done really at the holiday camp
Mm.
with the staff we had
So it
there.
sounds like you brought a bit of discipline.
Well, it was not just discipline. Well, they knew what they had to do, and
Yeah.
they knew where the prize money was.
Leadership.
They knew that, yeah,
Yeah.
they knew it,
Wonderful.
and they loved it.
Yeah.
One or two didn't like it
No, I can
and said,
imagine
"Oh no, 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 no! This man's turning Alderney into a holiday camp."
that.
But no, no. The entertainment, this island just took to it.
It
you know,
did.
and
So
it
this
did.
is leading me on nicely to meeting my father,
Yeah.
Mr. Ronnie Cairnduff, because obviously he's always been an entertainer, but
Yeah.
maybe a couple of years younger than yourself. And
Yeah.
and am I right in saying that he's almost in many ways been your mentee and mentor? It's you were running Old Newt before he did.
He's considerably younger than me, actually.
Well, Ray, you're all pretty old to me.
But in those days, I found him a very young man while I was in my 30s,
Wow.
So when he came along, I thought, wow. He stayed at the hotel, and from the word go, he was more or less saying, and it was during Alderney week, I think, and he was more or less saying, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. I'd love to be anything, I'll step in and help with anything, music, anything at all. He had his guitar with him,
Oh God.
and he couldn't wait to get on the stage. Call him off. And he was terrific. He was just the sort of guy you wanted if you were running something like Alderney Week, because he was prepared to do anything. Fabulous guy. I love him to bits.
Wonderful. And so now, now being in 2020, we're nearly in 2020. Alderney Week now is obviously a lot different to it was then, but we still have a lot of the same the events. What was it that you?
Let me just say that Ronnie, your father, he appreciates the fact that the key events make Alderney Week different. Torchlight procession, cavalcade, and those wonderful little things you can do in Alderney and you can't do anywhere else. You can take beaches over, you can take roads over, you can block the high street. You can't do it anywhere else.
I have to ask you, Ray, where did Torchlight come from? For those that don't know Torchlight, we're 2,000 odd people walking down a road with flaming torches to go and throw it onto a big bonfire.
Yeah, that's
It almost looks like a pagan ritual, like the Wicker Man.
You got it.
But this is it. So when we were kids, I remember saying, well, maybe it's because we used to burn the person we hated the most on. I don't know where it all came from. Do you?
No, it certainly wasn't the Wicker Man. In fact, when it was started, I think in very ancient times, as a sort of there's a word for it which doesn't come to mind, but it was an annual routine in the spring, and it was to do with the spring. And the local boys and girls would get together on a particular couple of days. They would make torches out of whatever, and they would light them and then run through the town, and then they would merry-make and go out to where Fort Clonk is at the moment and get up to all sorts of nonsense. We didn't ask what it was, and we will never know, but I think alcohol was probably involved.
I think it was.
And I look back, I look at our quarry parties now, and I think, there it is. It's just the same. It's all happening again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So I grew up, on this wonderful island, going to quarry and bunker parties, which, in the UK, we've got a terrible binge drinking culture. Whereas Alderney, don't get me wrong, it has a lot of alcohol put in it, but it seems like the parties here are very much more communal, organic.
Yeah.
What was it like, when you first came here? Were there bunker parties? Were there
No.
quarry parties? What did you get up to?
No quarry parties. There were no bunker parties. There were parties, believe me. And sometimes they were in the bunkers, but they'd be small. But there were no big parties like that really organised. But Alderney Week provided that in a way. And, there was no restriction on what people did in Alderney. You just did it, really. And so I remember lovely parties at Bray, on Bray Common, on Bray Beach. I remember when I first came, I was in my 20s, don't forget. So I didn't mind going to a party occasionally. And Longy and on Soy, we've got the best beaches ever.
It's wonderful, isn't it? And I don't quite know whether people really appreciate this. Now, I mean, I was talking to you last night about Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, and of course when she came to visit Alderney, and of course you were invited on to her boat to come and have her drinks with the Queen. What was that like? Kind of, do you think she had any idea that Alderney even existed?
Well, it's funny because I know that Prince Philip was fascinated. Because when I was invited on board, as you know, I got on board and I had arrived late because of a slight problem at the hotel. And that, I'm afraid, came first.
That's Alderney time, though, isn't it?
Isn't it? Alderney time. And I was put on a barge and taken out with my wife, and we were 10 minutes late. And to my horror, when I got to the what was the name of their lovely ship?
The Britannia, was it?
Britannia.
Yeah.
Britannia. I looked up the gangplank, and there, to my absolute horror, at the top, waiting and standing, was Prince Philip and the Queen.
Oh, God.
And I walked up, and I got to the top, and I said, Your Majesty, I'm so sorry that we're late. I'm afraid I run a hotel, and it's one of those things. He said, You are late. He said, and there's no excuses. He said, You're late. And that was Prince, and the Queen looked at him to say, For goodness sake, keep it quiet. Now, let's go down to the stateroom. So my wife and I followed them down to the stateroom. When we got down below, there were 80 to 100 local people and states members and a lot of local people there, all hoping to meet her, and on board this magnificent vessel. And as we were walking down, the Queen said, What do you do apart from your states work, for your hotel work? And I said, I'm a states member. She said, Oh, that's the local council. And I said, It is, yes. It's rather like Jersey and Guernsey then, is it? I said, Yes, it is, Your Majesty. And then he said, What sort of committees do you have? And I said, I run one called the La Beauté Naturelle. And then Prince Philip said, What's that? He said, It sounds like a beauty contest. And so with that, just at that moment, we were interrupted by an aide who came over, and he said, Your Majesty, the Winston Churchill and the Miller are just coming by with young cadets up on the mast, and they are waiting, hoping that they will see you. So she said, Please excuse me, I must go. And so I said, Of course, Your Majesty. And I walked back into the crowd, and we just sat and talked and walked around and chatted. And I was at the very back. 10 minutes later, Her Majesty walks back into the stateroom, and she looks around, she walks through the crowd, makes her way back to me and my wife and said, Now, where were we? You were talking about the committees you were on.
Wow.
I was so
She's a sharp one, isn't she?
impressed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. And this is the thing. So Alderney's no stranger to famous people, royalty, celebrities. I mean, you must have seen so many people come to this island.
Very much so. And when you greet, particularly if you're a states member, I think I met the Queen 3 times one day.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah.
Well, this is it, Ray. So obviously, that we could go on for hours and hours and hours talking about this wonderful island. But what is it you hope for Alderney, in the next decade? And it's 2020 now, Ray.
Yeah.
This is going to be an interesting decade for all of us. What do you hope for Alderney?
Well, I'm getting on a bit now, but I've still got my hopes and desires, and they're as keen and as honest as ever about this island. The only reason I'm still here after all those years is because I love it to bits. And I do. I love living here, and we've had a wonderful, wonderful life here. It is unfortunate, but Alderney has always had ups and downs. And I remember the downs, very much so, when we had hotel bookings and no airline. That was way back in, I think, I don't know what it was, 60-something, or 80, I don't know. About 81, maybe. And then Drew McQueen went out there, and they found an airline to suit this island. And not just this island, it completely served all of the islands, and was really a wonderful guide for other airlines of how to treat passengers and how to run an airline and make money with it at the same time. The complete opposite to what it is now.
Yep.
That is a very sad thing. And I just hope that it'll get back on its feet again. I'm sure it will. But Guernsey are going to have to give us a bit more space about how we go about it.
Well, this is it, Ray. I think that, with myself and Henry and our generation, we're certainly going to be coming here, till we're your age. And I think that, I mean, in all honesty, I'd like to be able to live here one day, and I think then that point, that'll become our problem, and in the same way that you dealt with your problems, you take a proactive approach, you become the champion and you push forward, right?
Yes, absolutely. What we need at the moment is somebody to do that. You need somebody out there to actually just make a little bit more noise to Guernsey, who now hold the purse strings very much so as to air travel. And they really have got to help us more and be more on our side. They are on our side, but they're dominated by their own problems. And they put Guernsey first in everything. It's understandable in a way, but at the same time, they can't allow Alderney to lose everything that it had. It will never lose that.
No.
It will always be special.
But this is it, inter-island politics aside, it's the community aspect of Alderney that keeps us all wanting to go and keep working forward. So thank you very much for being, one of the greatest inspirations in my life, certainly, and I know my dad's as well.
Oh, you've only learned, I've only told you a bit.
No. Well, this is it. We're going to leave it there now, Ray, but thank you ever so much for this, and, good luck into the new year.
Thank you very much. Same to you.
Amazing. A cut there.
You sure? You sure, Ron?
There you go.
Yeah. I mentioned you in dispatches, Ronnie.
That is